When we try to convince people, we usually go head to head. But let me ask you, in the last 5 years, how many people have you convinced deeply that they were wrong?
Uh, I,
Let's agree that not many.
I worry that sometimes I come on so strong that I just end up cementing their position.
We think we spend an hour expressing our opinion, but the other person spend an hour cementing their own beliefs.
Professor Ariely, where does this podcast find you?
I'm currently at Duke in my office in the Center for Advanced Hindsight. But my mind is scattered all over the place. I'm thinking about Israel. I'm thinking about Gaza. I'm thinking about London. I'm thinking about what's happening in American universities, about Iran, Syria, what's happening in South America. So the world is very troubling these days. I think if somebody wrote a book about this particular era that we're living in, we wouldn't believe them.
Yeah, I sometimes assign it to the fact as I get older, I get more anxious. I was sort of sleepwalking through life from sort of 0 to 30. I think from 30 to 50, I had the right amount of anxiety. I call it productive anxiety. And now I'm anxious about everything. But these times feel especially anxious. So it feels,
Actually, let me
go
say
ahead.
one more thing about this. I view my world, my job, as trying to promote small improvements. I think big improvements are tough. Small improvements are possible. I think that within the realm of social science, there's lots of opportunities for small improvements. We can get people to sleep slightly better. We can get people to save a bit more, to fight a little bit less. All of those things. But then these big things happen. And they take us back. And it's very hard to say, okay, we make these small improvements and these big step back that are, how do we find the energy to continue driving to these small improvements?
We were speaking off mic about how the Holocaust deniers are now merging with the October 7th deniers, people who are questioning whether these events ever really happened. And that in itself is disturbing. But what I find more disturbing is when I hear these people and I see them interviewed, other than the words that come out of their mouth, their background, their education, it just doesn't fit. You think these look like normal Americans you would expect to be rational, and they're not. And that's where your work kind of comes in, what it means to be irrational. So let's start there. Give us an overview of what it means to be irrational.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways to be. There's one way to be rational, and there are many ways to be irrational. But what you said is very true about this notion of beliefs, and my latest book is called Misbelief, exactly because of that. And we see these people, and we say to ourselves, 5 years ago, we thought that we had the same beliefs, and now we look at the same people and we say we don't understand them. How are how are they and us looking at the world in the same way and coming to such different conclusions? And it turns out that there's a psychological machinery that gets people to a state of misbelief. And as a metaphor, you can think about the cookie. And the cookie is a weaponized food that is designed to get us to want one and then eat another one, and another one, another one. And somebody designed the cookie, not intentionally to create the obesity epidemic, but somebody designed the cookie with an optimal combination of sugar, fat, and salt to get this behavior. And we have this machinery that gets us to believe very strange things that you would say, I don't understand how this happened, but this machinery is much more complex than the cookie because it attracts almost all of our psychology. If you look at misbelief, it's basically kind of almost like an introduction to psychology textbook where it's about emotion and stress, cognition, personality, social, and all of these elements have a role in the descent of people from having standard beliefs to having some very strange um, beliefs. And the basic ingredient that starts this whole path is stress. And let's take us for a second away from politics and the world around us. Think about two tribes of fishermen. One tribe of fishermen fishes in the deep sea. One of them fishes in the lake. Those in the deep sea have a much more unpredictable environment. Those that fish in the lake, much more predictable. Which one of them develops more superstitions? The ones in the deep sea. Why? Because a superstition gives people a sense of control. I'll clap my hands, I'll pray to a god, I'll do this and this thing, and it will give me some sense of control. And it turns out that when we're stressed, and I don't mean the stress of saying, oh my goodness, I'm so busy, I'm not sure how I'll manage. I mean the kind of stress that says, I don't understand the world. I don't understand why the Houthis in Yemen are all of a sudden attacking Americans. I don't understand what's happening in South America. I don't understand why Russia is attacking the Ukraine. Like, I don't understand what ChatGPT is going to do for my future work. When people are living in an environment and say, I just don't understand the world, they want a story. So superstition is one story, but we want a story. But we don't end there. It's not just a story. We want a story with the villain, right? Because now it's not our fault, it's somebody else's fault. And we want a complex story. And why do we want a complex story? Because the complex story basically gets to say, I thought I don't understand how things are. Now I feel that I understand more than other people. I understand that there's a cabal, there's all kinds of things like that. So people want story with the villain, and the story has to be slightly complex. And that's not the end of this. That's not the end of the funnel of misbelief. It's not the end of the descent toward misbelief. This is just a starting condition of what it starts. And if you think about COVID, I don't know what your feeling is, but my feeling is that we haven't finished even dealing with the emotional aftermath of COVID. I think about kids who are now in college, that spend the last 2 years of high school or the first 2 years in COVID. I think about people who are restricted, worried, concerned, um, lost money, lost faith in other people helping them. Like, think about all of this. It takes a long time to recuperate, and we haven't recuperated from COVID, and now we get these other avalanches that are just making it very tough for us, very tough psychologically, very tough to cope.
I want to double click on that. I really I find that really interesting. The notion that we become more vulnerable to conspiracy theory or misinformation or behaving irrationally when we're under stress, and that just makes a ton of sense to me. And as a boomer, I find that some of the views, some of this conspiracy theory, I mean, it's kind of cuts across all age groups. But the place I find it most surprising is with young people because they're the most educated generation in history. And yet, on some of the biggest issues, I find that they're the most prone to misinformation or conspiracy theory. So, taking that one step further, the thesis I would put forward is it's not what's going on in Ukraine or even in the Middle East that stresses them. It's what you said, COVID. I think that's remarkably obvious, and I wish I'd thought of that. But also that the younger generation with Instagram, social media, bulldozer parenting, my colleague and your friend Jonathan Haidt has written eloquently on this, that you have the most stressed generation in arguably American history. I mean, maybe young people during World War II, but you see all the indicators are young people are depressed and anxious.
I think you're absolutely right, but there's another component of it. And the component is we've been thinking about the inputs for stress, right? And you write about them. What's the cure against stress? What's the remedy? And the basic remedy against this kind of stress is resilience. Now think about resilience. What is resilience? Usually we think about, okay, we go through life, something bad happens, like in my case, an injury. Life gets really bad. And then the question is, do you bounce back? How long it takes you? And do you bounce back to where you were? A little bit below, a little bit above? That's usually what we think about resilience as coming back from a tragedy. But resilience is not just about coming back from a tragedy. It's also about the way we go about our life And do we feel that if something bad happens, somebody will catch us? I think of it as like an umbrella policy for everything, but not with the insurance, but it's as a social contract. Um, and the standard way to think about it is what is called secure attachment, right? So imagine you're a parent, you have a kid, they're 3 years old, you go with them to the park and you say, kid, go to the swing. If the kid goes to the swing and come back 45 minutes later, you have a kid with secure attachment. But if the kid goes and every 2 minutes they look behind their shoulder to see if you're still there, you have not been so successful. And that for me is the process of resilience. Do we think that as we go about our lives, whatever we do we think that if something bad will happen, somebody will catch us? And I think that that feeling is at an all-time low. How much time do people spend with their buddies? How much do people spend meaningful time with their buddies? How many friends do we have that we think will travel 3,000 miles and spend $20,000 to bail us out of jail? Not that this is the only test of friendship, but the reality is that we're getting into a situation that we have less and less resilience in society. And another interesting input is that as economic inequality increases, resilience goes down. Why? Because even at the level of a neighborhood, people with high income inequality in a neighborhood are less likely to ask their neighbors for help. Right? So we are less together. Of course, there's the Democrat Republican separation. There's all kinds of other things, but we're less together. We feel that there's less things to rely on. So all of this stress is not just increasing, but we have less resilience. So we have less things to defend ourselves. Like our psychological immune system against stress is weaker. So all of this is creating lots of tension. And then if you think about it, so we said, misbelief is about stress, cognition, emotion, and social. If we jump for a second to the social, think about a young person who, hasn't heard much about Israel or Hamas or the Palestinians, but they heard the phrase from the river to the sea. And they don't necessarily know what river it is or which sea it is, but that statement is basically a community statement for them. We have these people, we're marching, we are a group, we're together. All of a sudden, it fulfills a need. It fulfills a need. They belong to something. They have a group. And you said earlier that it's not the people that you would suspect. They're intelligent and caring and creative and so on. That's right. One of the things I learned through this journey of misbelief is that we shouldn't discount those people and we shouldn't discount their opinions. And what I mean by that is not that they're correct, but those beliefs answer real needs that people have. Right? Yes, we can say, okay, they're descending to the path of misbelief, they're ending up believing in something else, but what function do these beliefs have? Why is it that people have a need to believe that the world is flat, or the World Health Organization is doing something on their G5, whatever it is? Nobody wakes up in the morning and say, I want to have some misbelief today. People have some deep psychological needs, and they find these misbeliefs as a remedy for those needs. Now, it's not the ideal remedy, but it is a remedy.
I love that. I love the notion that you become more susceptible to misinformation and conspiracy theory when you're stressed. And that the resilience, just as you were talking about, it's a lack of resilience. I was thinking the thing that popped into my mind is the thing that gives you resilience is deep and meaningful relationships. And you articulated that, beautifully, the notion of a kid who feels like someone is there for them and can, doesn't have to be in the proximity, feels more resilient, more trusted. The thing you didn't touch on that I wonder is part of this is that people no longer trust institutions, which used to serve as a form of security. Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, the mistrust in journalism makes it very hard to know who to trust online. Lack of trust in politicians is lack of trust in academics, and lack of trust in physicians. The basically the feeling is that we are on our own, and even the court system, right? You would want to believe that if something happens, that there is a sense of justice out there, and when the sense of justice is eroding, that's very very tough. And and one other interesting thing about misbelief is that, in my definition, it has two components. One component is the belief in something that is ain't so. Okay, that's the outside. But the second thing is that it's a very deep belief that colors the way we view the world in general. So imagine that I will just take the example of the earth is flat. Imagine I think that the earth is flat. It doesn't end there. It says that NASA is lying, and every airline pilot is lying, and every government is deceiving us, and every school system knows the best, and the space program is a hoax, and satellites. And I mean, just think about what it is, and it's all of a sudden not just the belief that the Earth is flat. It's a lens from which you view life, and you say, "I don't trust any of the institutions," and that's why it doesn't stop there. Then it goes to other things and other things and other things, and then you hear a little piece here and there, and you make the picture. Because if you already don't trust, everything you see creates another level of mistrust. And as a society, we're losing a lot because of it.
Can you explain the concept of solution aversion?
Yes. So when we get to the cognitive components of how we change our opinion, there's of course a very simple component, which is we watch the news that we like. You decide if to watch NBC or Fox News. Right? People decide what to watch, and if you watch TikTok, TikTok take you to one of those paths depending on their algorithm. But then there's a second component, which is not about selecting which information. Like, imagine this is all the information you want. Confirmation bias is about selecting part of it. Saying, oh, I'm just going to pay attention to this. I'm just paying attention to this. Solution aversion is part of another component, which says, even when I get exposed to all the information, I'm able cognitively to discount the information I don't like and focus on the things that I like. So this is what is called motivated reasoning. And maybe the nicest study was done in the context of climate change. And the idea is that, if I try to argue with somebody who is climate change denier, let's say, the standard strategy is say, here's a paper, and here's another paper, and here's another paper. But what if it's not about the evidence? These are smart, intelligent people. They can read. What if it's about their cognitive system who says, I am going to ignore this. I'm going to discount it. I'm not going to pay attention. And solution aversion basically says that when we don't like the proposed solution, we reject the evidence. So maybe what we need to do is we need to start with solutions that we might agree on, and only then try to convince people. So maybe, not maybe, but a better approach would be to say to people, no, if climate change was real, let's talk about solutions. What would be reasonable? Let's come up with something. And then come up with something that would not upset them, that they will be willing to do, and then take it from there. So there's another, by the way, interesting trick in that regard, in the cognitive regard, and we call it the illusion of explanatory depth. And the illusion of explanatory depth basically says that people think they understand many things in the world, but we have only a very superficial understanding. And when you push people, they basically realize that there's a big gap between what they think they know and what they know. So I demonstrated it with a flush toilet. I said to people, do you understand how a flush toilet works? I said, yes. Scale from 0 to 100, stand it a lot. Great. Luckily for you, I have all the pieces of a flush toilet here. Please try and assemble it. course, nobody ever managed to assemble it. And then I say, how much do you think you understand flush toilet? And people say, not so much. And again, the idea is that when we try to convince people, we usually go head to head. But let me ask you, in the last 5 years, how many people have you convinced deeply that they were wrong?
Uh,
Let's agree that not many.
I worry that sometimes I come on so strong that I just end up cementing their position.
That's right. I think that's usually what happens. So usually what happens is we argue with people, and the other person is not even finished listening to our sentence. They're already counter arguing. They're already thinking why we're wrong. So we think we spend an hour expressing our opinion, but the other person spent an hour cementing their own beliefs. So we are not convincing other people, we're not convinced ourselves. The illusion of explanatory depth basically don't fight people, come from their side. Now, these coming at people's perspective and exploring that process. And by the way, another context, of course, is the war between Israel and Hamas. So I thankfully have lots of friends from all over the world, some from Arab countries, and a lot of them contacted me after October 7th wanting to talk. And I basically say, look, I don't want to talk about history. I don't want to talk about 1948 and 67 and so on. Not now. I also don't want to talk about who is more morally wrong. It's just not a healthy discussion. I want to talk, what do we do from here forward? What do we think that is the right thing to do from here forward? And they say, fine. And then I say, what would you like to see happen? And usually people say, I want an immediate ceasefire and I want Israel to leave Gaza. And I say, okay, I can't grant it, but let's say you got this. Let's say you got those two. So what's next? And usually they stop. They say, what do you mean, what's next? This is it. It's over. I said, no, no, no. It's not over. If there's a ceasefire and Israel left Gaza, does Hamas get to rule Gaza again? And usually they say yes. And I say, do we let them arm? And they say yes. And I say, nuclear weapon? They say no. And Air Force? They say no. Uh, Navy? They say, so I say, okay, so what do we let them do? And then if October 7th repeats in 3 months, what do you want the reaction to be then? Because it's there's no question that something like this would happen again. And it's not that those approaches move people from right to left or left to right. They just get us to the right state of being less sure in ourselves. And I think one of the dangers in polarization and in discussion is that too many people are 100% sure. And what we like, where is the nuanced understanding of how complex the world is? And the moment you get to a higher nuanced understanding of, look, this is a really complex situation. There's lots of wrong ways to go forward. It's very unclear. I think it's a better reflection of the situation. And it's also much more likely that we as a public, we are not decision makers in the politics, but make it much more likely that we as a public would, whatever our desires to pressure the political system, they would be aimed at the right direction.
Well, you talk about this. You talk about a means of combating misbelief. It requires a strategy rooted in empathy. And we talked about asking questions. Isn't it oftentimes also really important to acknowledge points on the other side and acknowledge the other
Yes,
viewpoint?
acknowledge the other viewpoint and the suffering. Like the discussion is like on both sides. There were some really wonderful academic papers showing that both sides just want somebody to say, you were wrong. This was terrible. Shouldn't have been like this. You were wrong. Now let's talk about what do we do moving forward. But hearing our pain, having some sympathy, because the other way we just think we're fighting, right? Couldn't you hear me? Here's what I just said. That why can't you acknowledge anything? But people treat discussions as if it's a battlefield. It's not a battlefield. At the end of the day, we should come up with a new joint understanding of what we are, and people are just not collaborative in this process.
We'll be right back. You speak a lot about motivation. Yeah, you've written and spoken a lot about it. What gets us to care about things and act on them?
So, so lots of things. I'll tell you, this is slightly out of the context of this discussion, but in the last 7 years, I have been tracking how companies treat their employees, how the employees feel about the company, and what it means for the company's performance in the stock market. So, for example, I'll ask you a few things. Do you think that companies that pay their employees better have a higher return to their stocks?
I'd like to think yes.
So the empirical answer is no, not much. And what about health benefits? Do companies that give better health benefits have higher return to their stock?
Well, I mean, I'm cheating here. I know the answer is no because McDonald's has gone up 12x and doesn't have healthcare. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
the answer is no.
Yeah. So the reality is that there is fork in the road between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation is salary and bonuses and chairs and tables and health benefits and retirement benefits, and all of those things that are called extrinsic motivation don't end up mattering so much. This is research that we had data from 2006 ongoing. So, for this period and hundreds of companies. The things that do matter end up being about intrinsic motivation. And one of the things that is the most important is, do you feel appreciated? Now think about, what does it mean to feel appreciated? By the way, I think that when I heard about this, when we saw the results for this, I thought about all the waste in the world in which we just don't get people to feel sufficiently appreciated. Think about all the people who work with us. Sometimes it feels to me that people behave as if we're born with a limited amount of compliments, and if we gave all of our compliments away, we would die. But it's not true. We can give. There's an endless amount of appreciation, endless amount of thanks, and and it really matters. People do lots of things, and they wanted to know that somebody is watching. They want to know that somebody is watching, and it's worthwhile. Another thing is psychological safety. Psychological safety is basically people's ability to express their opinions. And it's a little bit like resilience. And they feel that nobody would attack them. Nobody would cancel them. Nobody would attack them. That it's a safe environment to express thoughts and feelings. Alignment with the company is important, right? We work somewhere, but we need to know that we're aligned with the company, that we care about what it is that they are doing, that we feel connected. Bureaucracy, by the way, is one of the things that kills motivation. Almost nothing kills motivation as much as bureaucracy. Because when we add bureaucracy, we basically say to people, uh, we don't trust you, we don't care about your time, and we don't want you to do anything different. You see an opportunity for improvement, don't do it. Just do what's easy without tackling the bureaucracy. Of course, all of those are very, very negative in terms of motivation. So we have extrinsic motivation, intrinsic. What's really important is intrinsic. And then within intrinsic, there are these two subcomponents. One is goodwill. Think about your current amount of effort and call it 100. Not you, but somebody. Think about your current level of effort at your job and call it 100. Now ask yourself how much lower you could get and still not lose your job. For many people, it's quite a lot. And then think about how much up you can go if you were truly excited about what you do. That range between the minimum you have to do not to lose your job and the max you could do if you could be very excited, That's I call goodwill, because that's the part where the employee controls. I decide if to sit here and drink coffee or to try very hard. So that's one, the first component. Then the second component I call utility embracing. And think about the following story. Imagine a janitor in hospital. The janitor has a job description: soap, water, toilet paper, whatever. One day, our janitor walks in the hallway and they hear a patient crying. Should they go and check on him? You say yes. One day, the janitor walks and they see a family getting lost in the corridor. Should he redirect them? Yes. In fact, we understand that there's lots of things that are not in the janitor's job description that we want the janitor to do. We want the janitor to take the utility of the hospital, saying, this is good for the hospital. It's not good for me right now because it takes time for me and I'll have to go back to my duties later, but it's good for the hospital. And when you think about it, there are lots of cases in which we want people not to do their job description. We want people to look around and say, where else can I be helpful? What can I do to be helpful for the organization that is not in my job description? So those two components, utility embracing, opening our eyes and looking around, and goodwill, make a huge difference. And the thing about it, it's good for everybody. People who go to a workplace where they love going to are happier and more productive. Right? Everybody wins. But nevertheless, lots of organizations are not doing it the right way.
So, on a larger scale, what global societal issues, and I imagine there's a lot to pick from right now, have occurred as a result of our own irrational behavior? What are self-inflicted wounds here?
Well, right now, I think one of the big one is social media, and it's multiple wounds. The class action lawsuits in the US against tobacco are about 200 billion, I think, something like that. What would the number be if there were class action lawsuit against social media? It'll be hard to quantify, but we talked about loneliness and depression and social polarization and fake news and people are not getting vaccinated. And now you can just name name the thing. Imagine we would quantify that. That would be much more, I think. Um, and it's self-inflicted in the sense that when I started writing this book, in the proposal I wrote that there'll be a chapter on solutions. I don't have a chapter on solution. I have these little sections in the middle called hopefully helpful, because I think that the real solutions have to be much broader and bigger. We have to control social media. We have to create new standards for truth. I think the freedom of speech is a wonderful idea, but when it can be weaponized in a way that it is now, we have to reconsider it. It's one of the biggest problem, I think, of modern society is misinformation and polarization. Like 10 years ago, if you asked me what are the big problems facing humanity, this wouldn't be one of them. Now, I think that in order to go forward in anything, we need to unite. If whatever decision we make, the other half is going to say, I'm not accepting it, or I think this, we're not going to move forward in any meaningful way. So I think that would be number one for me now is the way that our information systems are working. And we need to do something really big to fix them.
Dan Ariely is a professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University and a founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight. He's also the best-selling author of a number of books, including Irrationally Yours, Predictably Irrational, and The Upside of Irrationality. His latest book, Misbelief: What Makes Rational People Believe Irrational Things, is out now. He joins us from the great University of Duke. Professor, it's always good to speak to you. And I came late to writing books. I wish I'd started earlier. It's been something wonderful to me. And your book, I think it was Predictably Irrational, was motivation for me to write the book because your agent reached out to me and said, you remind me of Professor Ariely and you should write a book. So thanks for that.
Oh, and Jim Levine is He's an amazing, amazing, amazing guy. What a mensch.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks again. Best of luck to you.